GMPC is something of a dirty term here in the Pathfinder 2e space, in the same way DMPC is a dirty term in the D&D space. And there are some pretty good reasons for that, but I don't necessarily think I'd call it a recipe for disaster outright, and I don't think that I'd respond to a request of what kinds of things make a good GMPC as you really shouldn't. Because, like, this is solid advice if you're a newer GM to the system, because it might be better to fill party holes if you want to do something like give them free archetype sets, someone can take medic. That's probably better if your only goal is to fill in a hole in the party. But for me, I have been running a game and I put out a survey, and I found that in the survey, the player's favorite part of my game was the GMPC. It was unanimous, strongly liked. And only 3 of my players filled out the survey because I just kind of put it out like the day before the session, and then... But I asked people at the session too, and yeah, everybody loved Ingot, my GMPC. So how did I do it? And I think I have a 5-step process that you can follow to have a successful GMPC. And so, let's get right into it. And step 1 is more of a prerequisite that you need to be thinking about at all times. And that is, you as the GM, in terms of combat time, are already getting a lot of turns, and you're already managing a lot of stuff. So if you want to use a GMPC, you need to be ready to take your turns fast. Because if you are a player and you're waiting half an hour between all of your turns, it's going to get pretty dull. So if you are a GM thinking about doing a GMPC, make sure whatever class you pick, you know how to play it well so you can do things fast. And can you learn to play a class well just by reading? Yes. But would I pick an Oracle for a GMPC when I'm not really sure how curses work for them and I need to reference the rulebook a lot? No, that's probably a poor choice. I would therefore stick to simpler classes so that you could play faster. And my favorite phrase when it comes to this is every additional player slows down combat twice. And the reason for that is once on the player's own turn, and once for the extra creature you have to add to keep combats balanced. So adding in a GMPC is adding basically 2 turns of stuff that is taking away from player turns in Spotlight. And that is a factor. That is something you need to consider, but you can mitigate that by, as the GM, taking your turns quickly. And you should strive to, as the GM, be only taking up 1/3 of the turn time at your table. Because, like, a lot of the time, you should already have a plan for what each of your things is going to do, and then you just do it, roll the dice that you need to, and then pass it on to the next player. And that should be your end goal anyway. It's just that if you're going to have a GMPC running along with the party, you need to be confident you can take your turns quickly. And if you do not think you are at that skill level yet, but you need to add a GMPC because it helps fill out and balance the party, I'd highly recommend looking into variant rules like dual class, free archetype, and any of those things that can give characters more versatility, so that you can then have people spec into healing. Or spec into more tankiness, or spec into whatever in a smaller group size. That's probably going to be, for the GM, less complex. It's going to be more complex for the players, but then they get to have a cooler character at the end of it. So that's kind of fine. But I really do think that is the main pitfall. I really do think the main pitfall comes from issues with taking too much spotlight from the players. So that leads me into my second point, which is play some kind of support. The exact type of support does not matter. Ingot, my super beloved GMPC, is a fighter, And fighter's usually considered a very aggressive, very offensive class that deals a lot of damage, does its big hits. But no, I built him the path of the wrestler. And as such, he is a support. He goes in there with a shield, stops people from being able to run into the squishy casters in the backline, because when I made him, the party makeup for that game was a lot of mages, a lot of very squishy characters. So I wanted to have a protector that would do interesting things. And so I made a grapple-based fighter that would do the trips, do the combat grabs, raise the shield, thread the reactive strikes on stuff trying to move around him. And that is a support. That is a form of support. And you just need to learn your trips, your grapples, and your combat grabs in order to be able to play that pretty well and pretty fast. And the reason I'm really emphasizing support and not like a hard carry is when a support rolls well, everybody else sees, yes, I have an opportunity to do something cool, because wrestlers are debuffers. So if he succeeds, the rest of the party is like, yes, I have free turns to be able to beat up this guy, and they have an AC penalty and like all this other stuff. Where if he was a hyper damage character and he rolled well, everybody would be like, oh, okay, the fight's over, neat. So I do highly recommend play it as a support, because some players may get frustrated, and especially for newer players or more casual players that don't really approach Pathfinder 2e as the true team game that is, and they just want to care about like the damage output that they do, which is a very D&D 5e mentality, because that is actually how you measure how useful you are. People coming with that mentality will be frustrated by a GMPC that they think is unfairly hogging the spotlight. But being a support is enough to mitigate all of that if you're taking your turns quickly and having it help other people out. But all that I just said is very traditional advice. So I want to bring us to my third point, which is where I'm starting to disagree with the common advice. And the common advice is, you should just have an allied NPC that basically just follows the party around and acts as a stat sheet when combat comes out. And I'm not a fan of that, because I think that if you're going to give the spotlight to something on the player's side, it should baseline be interesting. So if you're making a GMPC, and the players are going to be interacting with this person, they're going to be in the party all the time, and they are only showing up in combat to throw out heal spells or whatever, it's a bit of a missed opportunity, really, because, like, you could do something really cool, have interesting world building shown there. Like with Ingot, I used him to foreshadow an arc in the Plane of Metal. And so, when they did go to the Plane of Metal, very woefully underprepared, he was just kind of going around doing his thing, and they'd ask him for advice, and then he would help. And he'd frequently just like kind of start wandering off away from the party whenever downtime happens. And then when the party starts regrouping together, they're like, what the hell did he do over there? As he pushed the blacksmith out of their own shop, took it over, and would do this repeatedly, and it kind of became a bit. So every time they would do their thing, all the spotlight would be on the players in terms of the session time, so they feel like they were doing something impactful. And then they'd turn around, and then they'd see he was doing his bit over in the corner the whole time, and they were just like, yeah. And it added a lot more fun, a lot more spice to the session, because you now have an interesting thing going on that you can then justify at any given time by having your GMPC walk outside of the party, do something a little weird, and then come back. Never have them screw over the party, because that can make people frustrated, but you gotta go off, do something funny, and then come back with something that they then give the rest of the party members. Like, at one point he walked off, befriended a dragon that ran a smithy shop on the Plane of Fire, and then they kind of found where he was and were like, why are you here? And he said, well, I made a motorcycle, and everybody just kind of rolled with it because it's funny. And he offered the other characters to ride that motorcycle. It was never useful in combat because I specifically made it require hands, but it's an option. And I really do think that if you're going to make a GMPC, think of how you can make them a full character. And people say you should never have them make decisions, and I think you should never give them final say in decisions. But I think early on in the discussion, they should say, my opinion is we should do this. Like, there's a point in the Plane of Wood arc where the characters were discussing about the time they have left, and because Ingot was there in the party, I was able to say, but if we take too long on doing this, all the people that we met over there are likely going to die, and was able to apply the time pressure and remind them of the reasons that they were there in a diegetic way, which is valuable. So I really do think that you should put thought into making your GMPC a character that people like to interact with, because you're playing the game to have fun, and if you're going to put a major thing that's going to be present in every single combat encounter is going to be with the party for a long time, make it fun. Have fun with it. And if your players don't like it, whatever. Have them just stay in the town doing a downtime activity. And if you really need a GMPC, talk with your group and figure out what works and come up with a different solution. Because I'm not going to say that this solution will work for everybody, but I'd recommend trying it. It's not as evil as you'd probably think it is. And this, of course, feeds into my fourth point, which is ask for feedback. Your players know if they're having fun. You can go ahead and make a survey in Google Forums really easily. And you can then get quantitative data of what your players are liking and disliking about your campaign, which you can see on screen. And I asked comments about how they felt the combats were, and this was like, I feel they were too easy, I feel they were too hard, and it was kind of in the middle, which fair. And then I asked some free response questions at the bottom. Yeah, it's simple enough to do things like this, and it's just a sanity check to see what do my players like, and throw in the GMPC on that list, and you can see your players' honest response. Google Forms has an option for you to make the form entirely anonymous, so you can get honest opinions from your players. This survey didn't tell me anything I didn't already kind of know, but it's nice to have confirmation that, okay, I'm not going too far with my GMPC. I'm not going too far with the wackiness I'm having over here. In fact, they want to see me push it further. And it's nice to have that confirmation for me as a GM. And if you're going to be doing something that is traditionally very not considered a good idea, you're gonna want to have that player feedback and that feeling of safety of knowing my players are liking my game. That's gonna be important for you. And my final point is, don't treat yourself differently than the other PCs in terms of you being on the ground. Don't save your character extra. In fact, you now know that you have one character in the party that you can kill completely guilt-free. The players don't need to learn a new character about it. And if you are doing what I did and your players do care about him, I wonder what would happen if I threatened his life in the middle of a combat. Wonder if I could get a surrender negotiated. Like, he is one of the party. And as GM, when I'm handing out the treasure and stuff, I will have Ingot in character ask, hey, I think I can make X, Y, and Z for myself and X, Y, and Z for everybody else. How should we distribute this gold? And when it comes to like permanent resource allocation, I give that to the party. But I really think that if you are having a character that is traveling with the party for an extended period of time, using player character rules, taking a share of the loot, you should try and make them an interesting character, and you should care about them. But You shouldn't give them any special treatment one way or the other. If your players really like them, though, it's free real estate for some emotional damage. That's all I gotta say about that one. So, yeah. That's my basic advice list on how exactly you should make a GMPC work in your game. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Click on some videos that are floating around me right now. And with that, I'm signing off. Peace.